Yo! What's up guys? This is Wandergasm and today I'm in Toronto and that's my video. We're done. Thanks for watching. Cheers. So a lot of you guys have been asking me for a while now to make a photography tips video. So that's what I'm doing basically. I'm going to be starting out with some extreme basics. Things that I think anybody can do right now to improve their photography. So let's get right into it. Leg out. Tip number 1. Shooting raw. For the love of God, please just stop shooting in JPEG and shoot in RAW, because you'll thank me further down the line. Even if you don't know how to edit your photos in Lightroom or Photoshop yet, shooting them in RAW now will save you a lot of stress and hassle further down the line when you do learn how to do that. So some of the benefits of RAW include, obviously, when you shoot the image, it's saved as a much larger file. There's a lot more information saved within it. So when you are editing that image, there's a lot more to play around with. And secondly, when you don't shoot in RAW, if you're shooting in JPEG for example, the camera is applying in-camera edits to that image before it's saved. So think of it like this: if you're going to go and put some makeup on, you want to clean your face before you do that. You want to take everything off. But if you're trying to edit a JPEG photo, it's like trying to put makeup on top of makeup that's already been put on. And it just makes it a bit harder to get the effect you want, right? So you don't want that. So as well as editing the shot when you shoot in JPEG, it's also compressing the image, which again, it's not something you want. So shooting RAW, the images will come out less edited from the camera and you'll just have a lot more room to play around and edit those photos. Hopefully getting the look you want in the long run. So now you know how to do that, you have no excuse. Don't do it. Tip number 2 is learn how to expose your photos correctly. Now this can incorporate a lot of things, but it mainly involves learning how to adjust your aperture and exposure time correctly. Obviously, the longer you expose an image, the more light that's going to be let into it. So the photo's going to be higher exposure, right? And with aperture, the lower the aperture number or the f-stop, the more light that has been let into the lens. Think of aperture as a kind of faucet or tap. So if you think of light as the water, the more you open the tap, the more light you're going to be letting into the image. So obviously it's going to be more exposed. And the more you close it, so the higher the number, the less light you're going to be letting into that image, and obviously it's going to be less exposed. So you need to find a good balance between the aperture and the exposure time to get the image you want. I'm not going to go into too much detail about long exposures and short exposures because that might be an entirely different video on its own, but look it up, do some research online and you can figure that stuff out, but it's important to know. Tip number 3. Now this is something that again will help you in the long run when you're coming to edit your photos, and just in general is to keep your ISO as low as possible. ISO is basically digital light that's put into your image after you've used your aperture and exposure. And the more ISO you have in the image, when you come to editing, there's more likely to be noise in that image. I mean, it depends on the camera you have. Some allow you to go to a much higher ISO before it introduces noise. But if you have a 60D like me, you probably can't get past 1000 without having a grainy image. And that's not something you want, you know? So being able to use the aperture and exposure correctly allows you to keep the ISO much lower and just have a high quality of image in the longer run. Yeah. Tip number 4, and this does not involve f-stop or aperture or ISO, I promise. And that is find interesting light. Anyone can go to a place and take an image of someone standing against a wall. But if you go to that wall and get your model to stand there when there's some nice light shining across their face or something interesting playing across them, not everyone can do that because they might not be at the right time, they might not know how to do that, and it just brings a different element into the photograph, you know? It applies to landscapes as well, going out at the golden hour, getting up early to catch the sunrise, or even finding a spot where the shadows play nicely across an area. These are all things you can do for your photography to introduce another interesting element that doesn't make it that basic stock standard photo that anyone can take. An example of that, maybe I'll show you now. So this is a quick example of finding some nice or interesting light. I'm currently sat by the window, the sun is shining through. If I lean forward a bit, you can see the light plays across my face. So if we were gonna take some portraits, this would be some perfect light to do it in. We can play around like this, or I can sit back and just have the light creating a contrast across my face. Alternatively, we could shoot something like this, or you can shoot in boring flat light like this, which is coming from a light bulb. It's not really creating any interesting shadows or contrast. and it's just generally dull. So take your pick, guys. What would you rather have? What we just had before or this? I don't know what I'd pick. So yeah, as you can see, just playing with the light a little bit allows to bring a different element into your photo and just keeps it more interesting for the viewer. And the final tip, number 5, is learn how to use depth of field. Now, you've probably all seen those photos on Instagram or on Facebook or anywhere really, where the subject's in focus, but the background is extremely blurred and out of focus. And how that's done is by using depth of field, and that is from adjusting the f-stop. So, to keep it simple, the f-stop is basically the range of focus on the lens, and you can increase that field of focus or decrease it. So a low f-stop means that the smaller focus area, like here, so I have the f-stop just on my face, the background would be blurred out. That would be a low f-stop. Now if I increase the f-stop to say like 18, the field of focus would be much larger and everything in that field of focus would be crisp, but you wouldn't have the blurred effect in the background. You also need to take into account that obviously as you adjust the f-stop or the aperture, you're going to be letting less or more light into the image, so another thing that you need to take into account. But let's give an example of how changing the f-stop can affect the image now. So this is an f-stop of 1.8, and as you can see, the kitchen behind me isn't really in focus. That's because the main field of focus is this area here, so everything either side of me is in focus, but behind, and say something was in front of me by a bit, that would be out of focus too. So now we're going to switch to an f-stop of 8, which increases the field of focus, and it should bring the area behind me back into focus. So let's see that. So we've just pushed the f-stop up to 8 now, which means that the field of focus has increased. So if you look behind me, you can see that there's some wine glasses which are distinguishable. There's also some air plants on the side. And it's gone from being just a blur in the background to actually being able to tell there are some things behind me, which is what happens when you push the f-stop up. If we pushed it up even higher to say 14 or 18, then it would become a lot crisper and even more in focus. Can't remember what I was saying because the camera turned off, but yeah, if you enjoyed this video guys, let me know. Leave a comment below if you want to see another 5 tips. I'm sure I can do those for you. And yeah, it's been beautiful. Thanks for coming really, you know. Peace! Tip number 2 is learn to, leave a little comment in the